How to recognize a possible psyop, critical thinking chart. Now we're going to have a look at the Apollo program and we're going to see if it was a psyop. Let's start here first of all. Okay, it says number one, source transparency. Message comes from an unknown, unverifiable, or constantly changing source.
Well, it's constantly changing.
Okay, like it's a one then. Heavy use of anonymous insiders. That an event is fake, lack of info, deception.
They weren't using anonymous insiders. They were using hand-picked insiders.
We'll give it a one. Emotional manipulation. Messages designed to produce fear, anger, or outrage instantly.
Well, the fear was they had to beat the Russians, so give it a 5.
Encourages reacting before thinking. Emotional tone, proof of a psyop. Many real events are emotional.
All of it is because you're looking at a country of flag wavers out there. They had to be the best at everything, right?
Now, I give it a 3.
Okay.
Consistency of information. Claims shift frequently, but conclusions stay the same.
They were masters of that.
How about a 4?
Oh, yeah.
Pressure to agree. Messages that say only an idiot wouldn't believe this. Ooh, that's a 5 there.
That's a 5.
Attacks anyone who questions. Social pressure, guaranteed psyop.
They got a 5.
Oh, okay. Okay, next. Lack of verifiable evidence. Claims rely on screenshots, cropped videos, or untraceable quotes. Well, that's a 0 there, really.
Actually, what they did is they provided way too much information.
Missing evidence doesn't prove a cover-up.
They provided way too much evidence. What they did is they went the other way. When you look at the press kits, they were providing information on events that hadn't happened yet.
Okay, that just goes up another notch here.
Yeah.
Simplistic one-cause explanations. This single group controls everything.
They get a 5 on that.
This is number 7 here. Incentive structure. Someone benefits politically, financially, or socially from the narrative. And 2, people benefiting, evidence of orchestration.
Oh, that's the entire program in itself.
Yep, I agree there. Now it says manufactured urgency. Share this now before it's deleted. That's got nothing to do with it, really. Number 9, isolation from other information. Encourages you to ignore all mainstream sources.
Well, there was no other information on space travel. They were the creators of it. You have nothing else to compare it to. But you can't really answer that one. You give them a 1 because it's unique. They were uniquely creating space travel. They created what a spacesuit should look like. They created what the space environment is like for them to be able to travel in it. They created the lunar surface. All of the images of the lunar surface, they created them. That's just like Disney characters when you're doing an animation. You run off a cliff and you don't fall until you realize that you've run off the cliff.
And last but not least, number 10, algorithmic boosting. Content centered on extreme emotions spread usually fast.
Well, in today's world, they can spread their lies, all of our media resources that we have online, right?
Yeah, but we're talking about emotions here.
And it's emotion as well. They can get an emotional response back because when we say something, people say you should be eliminated from the planet.
All right, so let's just add this all up. Now, it says if you get 80% or higher, it's a psyop. So let's just have a look here. So there's 10 questions here. Let's add this up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 13, 18, 20, 25, 30, 31, 32, 38. You get 5 points per question. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 40, 50. So that makes 38 out of 50. Therefore, we arrive at a figure of 76%. That is a low psyop. Anything from 75 to 80% could be a psyop. Anything over 80% is a possible psyop. Anything 90% and over is a psyop. So we're borderline here.
Boy, they really covered their ass on that one, didn't they?
Yeah, I know. I'd say that is a psyop. Going on the points you raised, most of them apply to Apollo. Is the source verifiable? Is it constantly changing? Yes, it is. Are insiders the people speaking? Yes, they are. Is emotional manipulation? Yes, it is. You're not allowed to criticize it. Criticizing anyone who disagrees. Well, we know about that. Where's the missing evidence? Only certain people provide the evidence. It's so easy to identify it when you have that simple list to work with. 90% plus.
I think when we were just doing those questions that we were just giving too much grace to them. And I think that the behavior panel actually designed those questions like that.
Here we pulled up a Psyop recognition checklist from ChatGPT, and we're going to go over the questions and see if the Apollo moon missions were credible or a Psyop. So let's start with question number 1. Source legitimacy. 3 questions per category. First question, is the source anonymous or unverifiable? What do you think, Marcus?
The source is verifiable. The source is NASA.
Except what the source was giving.
Question number 2. Does the source refuse to show credentials? The source being NASA.
Well, they show credentials. They claim they've got all these rocket scientists and everything else. It's the information that's being provided by those sources that they give.
Does the story rely on unnamed insiders or agents?
No, it doesn't follow any of those.
No, it doesn't. It's the information that is in question, not the source of it. I mean, if somebody stands up and makes a comment or statement about the moon landings, are they lying or are they telling the truth? And if they're telling the truth, how do we know they are? Have they followed up with the evidence to support their assertion?
Okay, then we could give them anonymous or unverifiable because it is unverifiable.
Yeah, that's the point.
All right, well, let's give them 1 out of 3 for that one. Next question, number 2, emotional manipulation. 1, does the message trigger strong fear, anger, or panic? 2, does it try to bypass calm thinking? Or 3, does it use emotional phrases like, wake up, they're lying, only idiots don't see this?
Certainly,
they use all 3.
Yeah, emotional manipulation covers it.
Okay, that gets a 3 out of 3, that one does.
Remember all the stories about the brave astronauts and their families in Life magazine? That was emotional manipulation.
Yeah, if you don't believe this story, you're as dumb as a bag of hammers.
The third question is evidence quality. Is the evidence blurry, cropped, or missing context? 2, are the claims bold but proof vague or absent? Or 3, does it discourage checking original sources?
3 again.
Yeah, definitely.
Question number 4, urgency and pressure. 1, does it demand you believe or share immediately? 2, does it say things like share before it's deleted? Or 3, does it create a false countdown or crisis?
It did all 3.
Yeah, definitely.
Discouraging questions. 1, are people mocked or attacked for asking for proof? 2, does the message say that questioning equals betrayal? Or 3, does it label doubters as agents, sheep, or asleep?
All 3 again.
Oh, yeah. Question number 6, isolation tactics. 1, does it tell you to trust only one person, group, channel? And 2, does it claim all other sources are fake, corrupt, or controlled?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Check both.
Yeah. Number 7, oversimplification. Does it blame everything on a single villain or group? Or 2, does it reduce complex events to an easy one-sentenced explanation?
Give both check marks there again.
Yeah, definitely.
Question number 8, motives and benefits. 1, does someone gain money, power, followers, or influence by spreading the message? And 2, are you being pushed to donate, subscribe, or join something?
Well, that again, you got to check both of them off because they needed the support of the American people to fund it through their taxes.
All right. If 3 or more boxes are checked, treat the message as potentially manipulative or a psyop-like narrative. Well, the first one we have 1 out of 3. The second is 3 out of 3, so that's a check mark. The third question is 3 out of 3. That's a check mark. Fourth question, 3 out of 3. That's a check mark. Fifth question, 3 out of 3. That's a check mark. Sixth question, 3 out of 3. That's a check mark. Seventh question, 2 out of 2. That's a check mark. And last but not least, 8, 2 out of 2. That's a check mark. We have a psyop here. That's 90%.
Yep, the whole thing is a psyop, and you can trace it right back from the beginning, where the whole thing started.
So if you think about it, we did 2 psyop evaluations, and in both of these instances, we have a psyop.
Yep,
A long running one as well.
still going on today, because they're still trying to get back to the moon. Remember that one?
Yeah,
They're going to
you need to use the quotes back.
Yeah, they're going back to somewhere they've never been in the first place. It becomes blindingly obvious after a while.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that people need to understand is when you're looking at all of the data on there and you see when you're reading any of the documents on there, especially the original ones, and the fact that they needed to change them, change the information in them, or you see a document and it shows that it has all of these problems that need to be resolved, but you'll never find a PDF file on it where they resolve them.
No. That's a key
and
point.
One prime example, of course, is the spacesuits. If you want to test a container to see how it stands up against a force, like say a propane tank, you build the tank so that it's at least 3 times stronger than the force it's going to encounter. When you can't produce the force of the vacuum of space, how do you test a spacesuit when you can't reproduce the force that it's going to encounter? And that's the same as when they come up with the radiation numbers. If you don't know what the radiation numbers are outside the vehicle, you have to have those numbers first, and they never ever give them.
Yeah.
So how do you know how to suppress that radiation to protect the astronauts? That's the same with the sound up in a Saturn V rocket taking off. It's 205 decibels, and that's with the sound suppression. They're putting millions of gallons of water onto that pad to suppress the sound as well as the heat and other reactions that are going on the pad, the vibration, everything that's going on there. They're using water to suppress it, and it's still 205 decibels. That's incredible. Okay, you can't get anywhere near this vehicle when it's taking off.
6 miles they had to be away from it.
And it was still 130 decibels. Okay, you can't even yell and hear the person beside you. You can't yell loud enough to be heard. I realize a NASCAR race is just like if you were standing right trackside when the cars are going by, you're just about 100, 105 decibels. That's what you're hearing going by there. And if you don't have ear protection, you're going to do ear damage to you. If you had a race for 2.5 hours, you're going to have permanent ear damage if you don't wear protection. That's a NASCAR race. If you hit 110 decibels, it's twice as loud. Hit 120 decibels, it's 4 times as loud. Pain threshold of humans, the pain threshold is 140 decibels, and at 180, it literally will kill you. When you reduce the sound of a Saturn V rocket by 80%, it will still kill you. That's a lot of sound suppression. And we're already seeing the sound suppression in place to bring it to 205, putting millions of gallons of water on that pad. Apollo 17 was a night launch, and the vibration coming off of that rocket literally lights the sky up. It's vibrating the molecules in the air that it literally turns to light. I mean, that's incredible. And then they're sitting there going, oh, well, there was people on board those.
Yeah, people 300 feet away from those engines as it launched.
Yes.
You think they might have heard a few noises by then?
But we have the recording of them communicating with Houston, and it's 70 to 75 decibels.
Oh, they got this wonderful sound suppression, whatever that is. Where's the evidence for that? It's like my question to NASA when I wrote to them. I wrote originally to the manufacturer of the spacesuits, Hamilton Standard, what protection against radiation was incorporated into the spacesuits. Their reply was, we built them according to the specification NASA requested. Direct your question to them. So I did. I'm still waiting for the answer.
We can go online and look at an x-ray of one of the spacesuits.
Yeah.
So you know there's no protection.
It comes back to the questions that are never answered because they're too embarrassing to answer, because they haven't answered the questions themselves. We've looked at it in so much detail, done the experiments, carried out the necessary tests, and demonstrated conclusively that photographs cannot be taken under the alleged vacuum on the moon. Well, not alleged vacuum, there is a hard vacuum on the moon. Nobody has tested photographic film under those conditions. And even if it's tested under minor vacuum conditions, it still affects the photographic film. So every single photograph taken on the moon, allegedly, is fake, was taken here on Earth.
You know, one fellow said in the comment section, he says, has any of these spacesuit companies ever tested their spacesuits to Tor 10 to the minus 6? Then he said, were any of the Apollo spacesuits tested to Tor 10 to the minus 6? He's saying he has a film of Neil Armstrong in a vacuum chamber. Problem is, I said to him, we don't see the gauges. They never show you the gauges to let you know at what level he was in. I do believe that when we did another video in the past, he was at Tor 10 to the minus 2, somewhere in there.
The one document I read on it, and it said the spacesuit, not Neil in the spacesuit, but the spacesuit was tested to 220,000 feet.
So I think we should check that.
You're 40 miles off the ground, so you're 2/3 of the way to the Kármán line. You're about the same height as when the first stage cuts off, 70 kilometers. That's as high as that document showed with Neil in it.
Look at this. Typical vacuum levels used in Apollo spacesuit tests were Tor 10 to the minus 6 to Tor 10 to the minus 7. Rubbish.
So where was it tested at that level?
It says here the SELS Chamber B, vacuum capability, Tor 10 to the minus 6, used for full suit mobility and EMU tests, Armstrong included. So Armstrong stood in a chamber only 1/1,000,000th of a Tor, about as close to space as possible on Earth.
Well, they could say it as much as they like. Where's the evidence? Where's the gauge that was measuring the vacuum?
We can't see it.
No.
They're putting it into percentages again.
Yeah, we're being misled here.
So the SESL Chamber B, they claim, tested to Tor 10 to the minus 6 to Tor 10 to the minus 7. The only chamber that can do that is Sandusky. And they can only get to Tor 10 to the minus 6. So this is not correct.
Well, the one in Houston, the original PDF file, claimed that under ideal conditions, they could get it down to 10 to the minus 4. And those are smaller chambers, but they were large enough to put the capsule in. That particular document shows the astronauts with vests on, with little brass nodules all over it and wiring on it to ground their bodies, because you have that static electricity charge buildup. That's the same as when it's cold out and you lose the moisture. You're instantly getting static, everything you move. So when they were moving around, their bodies are actually creating static. So they're wearing a vest with all of these little brass knobs all over the vest, and all those wires are going back and grounding their body with absolutely no moisture in the air. When they're pulling that vacuum down, they're creating a static electric charge just from the movement of their bodies. Now, they would have the same problem with that inside the craft when they were landing, when they were walking around on the lunar surface. That lunar module is sitting on the lunar surface and they walk away from it. When they come back to it again, it's sitting there building a charge just from the sunlight hitting on it. There's going to be a static electric discharge between them and that object every time they come near it.
Well, tell that to the AI. Let's just take a look at what Google's AI says. When testing the Apollo spacesuit in a vacuum chamber, Neil Armstrong was exposed to a pressure level effectively simulating the vacuum of space, which was Tor 10 to the minus 6 outside the suit. Inside the suit, the pressure was maintained at 3.7 psi, which is approximately 192 torr. Well, we certainly don't see that on the torr gauges because they won't show them to us.
For people to understand, if they think there's so little difference between the levels of torr, if it's only a little bit more, then they could build a gauge to measure all the way to toward minus 70 or minus 20 or whatever, right? If there's so very little difference, well, then why does a mechanical gauge break if you exceed torr to the minus 6? Why all of a sudden Can you not use rubber seals after 10 to the minus 6? If there's so very little, a millionth of a bit, it's only a millionth of a torr difference.
But what's a millionth of $1 billion? I would rather have the full billion.
Right. But if there's so little difference, why all of a sudden would rubber seals fail and you have to use composite steels, one time use only?
Well, that's what Bill Demos said.
Why can't you build a
Yep.
gauge that won't break if it's that little difference? It's because there's a tremendous amount of difference in the force.
This whole examination of vacuum is so elementary when you understand what vacuum is and what vacuum means, that anybody who questions it does not know their physics. We've experienced that already in discussions with other people. Remember those ones who said that, a vacuum, it's only a fraction less. They didn't understand what they were talking about.
I listened to one guy, he was in contact with me, and he said, "Oh, my bicycle tires take 65 psi, and the vacuum is only the difference of 1 atmosphere." I said, "Why the hell did it take $1.6 billion in 1969, which is like the equivalent to $16 billion today, to build Sandusky, if you're only dealing with 1 atmosphere? Who in the hell would need to build 10-foot reinforced concrete walls with another couple of feet of aluminum and steel and titanium sealing compounds in there if you're only dealing with 1 atmosphere?" I said, "You can put 65 psi in your bicycle tire." I said, "Stick the bicycle tire in that vacuum chamber and see what happens to it. See if it's only 1 atmosphere." The walls are 10 feet thick. They couldn't make that kind of a mistake. Not only that, people don't understand that that entire structure is basically shaped like an egg. It goes 90 feet into the ground.
With a huge steel saucer-shaped floor to it.
Yeah, it's 90 feet into the ground, and then it's anchored into the bedrock on top of that. Then they can pour the floor, because that's the structure down there that's stopping the floor from being sucked up. Because they just couldn't put a pad there, would just suck it. You just couldn't, pour 6 inches of concrete and expect it to sit there.
Hey, it won't. No.
It's an egg shape, one of the strongest structures in nature.
And if they don't understand that, they can't possibly understand what we're talking about. That is the problem. That is why you get people criticizing what we're saying, because they don't understand the physics behind the comments we make.
Somebody knew how to do the math to figure out how thick and strong those walls had to be. And you sit there and go, well, there's just 1 atmosphere on the outside. It's only 14.7 psi. That's on the outside.
Yeah.
What about the force on the inside? And that's what they need to understand. NASA says, well, a vacuum doesn't suck. It doesn't do this. It doesn't do that. Well, that's when you're in the vacuum. The effect it has on an object, a physical object, or particularly if you have an object that has air inside of it, it's going to affect it. And if they don't think a differential in atmospheric pressure has any kind of a force, they need to go to Florida or Texas or Arkansas and stand out and see what a tornado does to you. Okay?
Yeah.
Just that small differential in pressure will blow your house down. Okay? Because it has molecules with it. And they want to equalize that pressure. So whatever you have inside of a container desperately wants to get out, and it's going to travel at the speed of light to try and equalize the vacuum of space. The pressure's got to be equal. That stuff starts traveling at a tremendous pace out there. People don't understand the amount of force that has. But the Sandusky, the construction of the Sandusky chamber should tell you the forces they're dealing with just to get the 10 to the minus 6.
I'm not sure it even gets that low. It takes a week to evacuate a chamber just to get the air out.
Well, it takes the same amount of force to remove the atmosphere inside the chamber. It's the same amount of force that the vacuum is going to exert.
Yeah, it has to remove the air.
Yeah, what it takes to pull it out of there is the same amount of force that's going to be in there.
And atmospheric pressure at 14.7 pound per square inch is basically the equivalent of 1 ton per square foot.
That's just on the outside. And then you've got the force on the inside.
If you have a sphere whose outside measurement is 1 square foot, there's a ton of pressure of air acting on it when you remove the air from the inside the cube. It's a lot of pressure. It's a very powerful force. That's why you
Even
have vacuum cranes that
yeah.
can lift up 5 tons of metal tubing.
Oh, and they have a differential rating on there, a safety rating of at least 4 to 5 times. The vacuum can lift 5 times more than what they're rated for to lift. That way, there's no failure rate on those. But if you take a look at even Mythbusters, they picked up a truck using a vacuum cleaner, and the torque differential is maybe 200 torque. You'd have to have a really good, strong commercial vacuum cleaner to go from 760 to 600. 160 torque differential. They were just using a shop vac. And all they did is they spread that force enough square inches over the vehicle that they literally could lift it up. But that's not even a vacuum. That's just a very small amount of air pressure differential. They're basically what they're showing is this is all the differential there needs to be for a hurricane to pick your car up and throw it into your building.
Yes, very easy to do that, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you get a pressure differential.
But that's not a vacuum. That's just a pressure differential.
Yeah.
And a very small one at that. Your barometer can read that. But when you get into the torque level, the spacesuit should be at least rated for at least 3 times more than the environment that it's going to be in to be a safe suit.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can't even reproduce that, not even close to it. And nobody's ever been in a spacesuit inside the Sandusky chamber.
Let
Well,
alone
first
a
of all-
specialized one.
well, first of all, you'd have to spend quite a few days in there just to get the pressure down.
Yeah, it's about a week, I think it takes to get the pressure down.
And then to bring it back again, if there's any kind of a failure, you're simply dead. They can't get in there. But the way NASA puts it forward, we're doing spacewalks on the ISS, we're doing this, we're doing that. Well, then set everything up for these guys to practice inside Sandusky. They should be in there all the time. Keep it down at that level, put an airlock on Sandusky so that they can go in and out, put a suit on and go right into it, practice and come back out instead of waiting all that time for that pressure to come down in there. Just put an airlock on it. Astronauts can go in and out all day long, and they can practice all the time so that they can be accustomed to any problems or whatever it is that that suit is putting on there, because that suit's going to tighten up a fair bit. You're going to have to use the gloves. What happened to the robotic gloves so they could close their hands? Why did they give up on that? Help them close their fingers, because their fingers are going to be straight out. They're not going to be able to operate now.
It's like those tests that Ralph Rene did with his little vacuum chamber. It's a very small level of vacuum. As you say, your fingers were just put out. You couldn't move them.
You could create a small container like that and put a leaf blower on it just to suck the air out, and you'd have a problem.
It wouldn't take much.
No.
People who understand vacuum, people who work with vacuum, such as Bill Demos, understand the problems, which is why he contacted us when he saw our original discussion about vacuum. He said, "You're right, you're correct. And I know because I work with vacuum as a profession. That's my job." And he showed us all his equipment.
One of the reasons why they work in with vacuum equipment is because they don't want contamination with the materials they're working with. They don't want any oxidation. One of the number one things that they don't want is oxidation when they're working with metals. They're laying down single atomic layers of material to examine. When I was talking to him about that stuff, that's highly technical. Like the equipment had to be cleaned and cleaned and cleaned. And if you see any kind of a problem at all, you just start over. When you see how those things are bolted down, the seals that they have to use, and when they bolt those things together to keep that seal on there, you don't see any of that in space. Way too heavy.
Which is why people who don't understand vacuum are not really in a position to criticize what we say about it, because vacuum is a very powerful force.
Unfortunately, when you go online and you start looking at different companies that have vacuum things, like for automotive, like for your air conditioning system, stuff like that, they come down and they just have a nice little gauge that, pulls 30 inches of mercury, and they think that that's a perfect vacuum, and they're sitting at 29.8 inches of mercury, which is good enough to put on your car and get rid of all the moisture because it's low enough down that water boils and evaporates off. Well, Bill Demos is working with that, but he wants to get other materials to vaporize and get out of there. So you need a much higher level to get rid of metals. To get rid of metals. To get rid of metals.